Good evening. The program you're about to hear is entirely spontaneous, and the views of myself as well as my guests are not necessarily the reflection of views of this station or our sponsors. Today, our guest is Mr. Ernest Washington, a well-known bass player, musician, and overall great guy. Mr. Washington, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, today we're talking about the evolution of funk music in the 1970s. When was the first funk song you ever remember hearing?
That's a great era. First of all, let me say that, and props to the bass players that came out of that era. It started with James Brown. I was into James Brown before I got into all the groups. The groups came after him. I mean, it was Sex Machine, Give Me That Licking Stick.
Great record.
You know, all those on Cold Sweat. He was a man that brought the funk to us. And then years later, a couple of years later, it wasn't that long, all the self-contained funk bands started coming about with Sly and the Family Stone, Kool and the Gang. You had Parliament Funkadelic. You had Mandrill. I mean, it was just a whole consortium of funk bands in the early 70s and, you know, late 70s that came about. They were really good. General Kane, a whole bunch of them came after that, to answer your question.
You know, to hear you say that, it reminds me that when you take a look at the seminal influences, you're talking about James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, and the musicians that played in those bands, really the development of funk as a major musical force was really the product of about maybe a dozen people.
That's correct.
Well, it's a remarkable era, and some of that music that we heard back in 1977, 78 is still relevant, and it is still commercial today, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I agree with you, because a lot of rappers sampled it. James Brown is one of the most sampled. Sly and the Family Stone. George Clinton is second behind James Brown. Is the most sampled artist or band, you know, by these young rappers these days.
Right.
So that music, whatever got you back then, if you came up in that era, it still gets me now. You could put a song on like Knee Deep or whatever at a house party or at a barbecue, and people still get up and dance that grew up in that era because it still hits you. They had a certain formula ingredient that, you know, they played several types of grooves that could just get the people on the dance floor and keep you dancing. They were great. These musicians sit down, they thought their songs out, arrangements, and they wrote some great stuff. It still lasts 40 years later.
Wow. Our final question, who's the best bass player you ever heard?
The one that influenced me to pick up a bass was Larry Graham. He was a great innovator. He started the thumping and plucking style. And I was young back then, but I always noticed it was something different that he was doing. And once I seen him like doing that motion with his thumb, you know, you play air guitar. Every time I heard one of his songs, I did that little thumping motion until I got a bass. And the guys around town, the local musicians, they showed me what it was about. So I just watched them, went to their rehearsals. They let me sit in, and, you know, I learned that style. And then listening to records, I pretty much knew what the style was. So I just developed it now to the point where I'm at the same level as the musicians that influenced me.
You know, you're right. I'm glad you brought that up, because I am not surprised that you mentioned Larry Graham as your biggest musical influence, because your style is almost indistinguishable from his, a little bit more contemporary. Of course, so many years have passed since Mr. Graham did those original sessions. So what song are you going to do for us today?
It's going to be a song I wrote called Chemicals. It's a rap tune, but I'm playing bass on it and guitar.
Chemicals are something you don't play with. They mess up your mind and make you have a fit. All young kids sit back and listen, cause I'm gonna tell you something you all been missing. Young ladies, men, boys and girls, there's a lot of people putting it in your world. They're putting it here for you to take, and when your life is gone, it's your mistake. Heroin, cocaine, and even crack, it's taking your brains and never coming back. You're losing everybody in neighborhood over some dumb drug you thought was good. Chemicals, you don't need those chemicals. Chemicals, stop taking those chemicals. Chemicals, you don't need those chemicals. Chemicals, stop messing with the chemicals. Chemicals are something you don't play with. They mess up your mind and make you have a fit. All young kids sit back and listen, cause I'm gonna tell you something you all been missing. Young ladies, men, boys boys and girls, there's a lot of people putting it in your world. They're putting it here for you to take, and when your life is gone, it's your mistake. Heroin, cocaine, and even crack is taking your brains and never coming back. You're losing everybody in neighborhood over some dumb drug you thought was good. Chemicals, you don't need those chemicals. Chemicals, stop taking those chemicals. Chemicals, you don't need those chemicals. Chemicals, stop messing with the chemicals.